Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Seekers of the Supernatural. Before we start our program tonight, I'd like to talk, if I may, just for a moment, about someone who was close to Ed, to Lorraine and myself. A young man, 26 years old, who was a student of Ed and Lorraine's. He was a psychic investigator. Lived in a little town of Adena, Minnesota. He touched many people. He came to our Halloween program that we held back on October 27th. He's been involved in many, many cases throughout the United States with us. He's written for the New England Society for Psychic Research Journal. We lost this man Monday evening, November 11th, at age 26. His name is Daniel Berg. He's a friend of mine, he's a friend of Ed's and a friend of Lorraine's, and we're going to miss him. But someday I hope that myself and Ed and Lorraine will see Daniel Berg on the other side. So with this somber opening, I'd like to start and talk about something that has hope to it, hope for us all. It's about miracles. Can the supernatural realm perform miracles? Well, can God perform a miracle? The answer is yes, positively. Tonight we're going to start with Ed, if we could, and talk about miraculous miracles. Ed, if you could start, please.
Well, you know, a lot of people would say to Lorraine and I, and even you, Tony, can you prove there's such a thing as the supernatural? Well, of course we could. In fact, we proved that in a court of law in 1990, right here in the United States. But I think the best proof that you could possibly give people would be miraculous miracles. Whether you're a Catholic or Christian, whatever you are, this is scientific proof that such a thing as an invisible realm of the supernatural does exist, that God does exist. For instance, you know, up in Canada, a small man by the name of Brother Andre, he only stood probably 5'1", small in stature, but big in spirit, huge in spirit. This man was known as the keeper of the door in Montreal, Canada, at Mount Royal. And for 50 years, he just kept that little building, a little chapel, cleaned up and ready for the masses in the morning. There's a statue which has been dedicated to him. And I myself know about miraculous miracles through this man, but I'd like to just tell a little bit about him first. He was instrumental in the building of St. Joseph's Offertory, a huge basilica, where if you went there today, you would see hundreds of crutches. You would see hundreds of braces of people that were miraculously cured at that offertory. Now, what the people do is they go up these, probably about 50 stairs on their knees, and they say a prayer at each stair. Well, we went there in 1953. My mother had cancer. It was all through her body. They couldn't do anything. They sent her home. And this was just a little, maybe 2 or 3 weeks before Christmas. One day I went up to the drugstore, and a man there said to me, how's your mother, Ed? I said, well, she can't eat, she can't sleep, she's in terrible pain. I just wish that she'd go to sleep, you know. And he said, have you ever heard of St. Joseph's Shrine up in Montreal, Canada? I said, no, I haven't. And of course, at that time, it was just being built.
Right.
And so he said, a lot of miraculous miracles occur there. Now, I wasn't looking for a miraculous miracle. I didn't think that could happen with me, my mother. I was hoping that she would fall asleep one night and she wouldn't wake up, that she'd be at peace. Because, you know, in 1953, they didn't have the pain-killing drugs that they have today. I go home, and Lorraine was there, my father was there, and I said, I just met a guy, and he told me about this shrine up in Montreal, and I told him all about it, and they said, well, gee, let's go up there. It'll only take us 8 hours to get there. So we left the following morning. We left my mother with a neighbor next door, took care of her, and one of her sisters. Well, we headed up, and we got to Montreal. Beautiful, beautiful shrine. Wasn't even complete yet. But we did go up the stairs. We did say the prayers, and we stayed there one day. Went through the Stations of the Cross and so forth. And then we headed home. Well, we got home the following night, and Tony, I will never forget it. The lights were on upstairs in my mother's bedroom. Now remember, she was in terrible pain. She couldn't even speak, you know, she was very hoarse.
Mm-hmm.
And if she laid down, it pained her. If she sat up, it pained her. Everything was pain. We're walking up the stairs, and I can hear voices talking. My mother's voice, very strong, not weak. I can hear this neighbor, the woman next door, talking to her. I look into that room, Tony, and I see her eating an apple. This woman couldn't eat, couldn't swallow anything. Eating an apple and smiling and talking. Then she went on to tell us how the night before, suddenly there was tremendous pain and heat went through her body. And suddenly there was no more pain. And she had an appetite. She wanted to eat. 3 days later, she walked out of that bedroom, down the stairs, into our car, and we took her to Leahy Clinic in Boston, Massachusetts. A couple of days later, they performed an exploratory operation. Now, the doctors at St. Vincent's Hospital said she was full of cancer. She was like jelly. There was nothing they could cut out, nothing they could do. They did not find one trace of cancer. She lived for 22 years. All right, that was the miracle. But Brother Andre, every night, would go up into this little chapel. He lived there. There was a small room there. Had a table, had a cot. It was no more than a cot, a small oil stove, and a chair. That was it. But it was his duty to keep that chapel clean for the masses the next morning. But at night, after 9 o'clock, things so terrifying would occur in that chapel that other brothers and other priests would not go into that building. And we have a picture of Brother Andre here, which I want to show, and then we'll show the chapel. Now,
there he is.
There's the statue, a small man, 5'1" maybe. And the next picture shows the chapel that he lived in, and that was the only thing that was there at the time. But he was instrumental in the building of St. Joseph's. There it is right there.
That's up in Montreal.
That's where he lived.
Yeah.
That's
He
right,
lived there on
Montreal,
the
Canada. He lived
second floor.
upstairs there. The downstairs was used for the Mass, and you can imagine how cold it must have got there nights and days up in Montreal.
I take it that shrine is still there?
Oh, it's
Oh,
still,
yeah.
oh yeah,
Oh,
sure.
yeah, the
So anybody
old
can go there and...
Oh, yeah.
But that's only the little shrine. The big one, the huge place, is just above it. Now, a huge monstrosity of an animal, like a cat, would appear in his room. It was the devil. And I say the devil. I don't say an evil spirit, I say the devil. A lot of people don't like to use that type of wording because they think that's medieval. There are no such things as devils. Well, I want to tell you something. There are devils, there are demons, and there are evil spirits. And those devils, demons, and evil spirits would enter that small chapel. Very frightening things. You would hear all kinds of sounds down the chapel, smashing, breaking sounds, chains, anything that would frighten you. This man would stand his ground, and he would start to pray. And he was so pious that he overcame those evil spirits. During the celebration, when they were first building the foundation for the shrine of St. Joseph's, huge, big place. There was like 40,000 people there. And he was standing there, and suddenly he levitated across a 40-foot excavation in full view of all those people.
Wow.
Levitated. Now, when I went there, they had a big cardboard sign telling about all of these phenomena. Today, for some reason, and I don't like it, the church has taken that sign away. They seem to be embarrassed by devils, demons, exorcisms, and many exorcisms were performed there. But I think that the men in the church had better smarten up, because Jesus Christ exorcised devils and demons and evil spirits from people, they seem to be embarrassed by the fact that these type of phenomena occur today. You know why? Because most of them don't know what to do about it.
Mm-hmm.
They'd probably make better shoe salesmen than priests.
They're afraid. They're
I
afraid.
was just
afraid
talking
of it.
about exorcists today. We have very few in America. But the Pope, who is, of course, top dog here as far as the Catholic Church goes, he advocates, again, teaching young seminarians in the area of demonology. He wants more exorcists.
Oh, that's good.
We
Yes,
need
it
them
is.
today.
It's very
good.
needed.
And Lorraine remembers well what happened on those nights, because she went up those stairs on her knees all the way up. I went halfway up. I have to admit, I went halfway up.
On the St. Joseph's Shrine?
Halfway.
Yes.
Lorraine, I know you want to talk about miraculous miracles, but I also know that you'd like to say a few words about our friend Daniel.
Yeah, I would like to say a few words about Daniel. I don't mean to stay on a somber note, but his passing is only 2 days, has only been 2 days. I was the last person to talk to Dan before his death in Minnesota. And he answered, which was a tremendous surprise to doctors and family. They say that his coloring changed. They put a photograph of him and I together at the Halloween seminar that we held in front of him, and I asked him if he knew I was on the phone, and he said yes. I told him things and asked him questions, and he answered me. And he also showed emotion at one point and smiled, they said. His family, I have to say, are probably the strongest people I've ever known. They are so strong, I guess, in their faith that they are able to talk, and they helped him, especially his mother, Betty, helped him to make that transition. And much to the surprise of doctors and nurses at the hospital regarding leaving his physical body behind and going on to his earthly home. It was very, very beautiful to have that opportunity. But Dan himself was a very special young man, as the three of us will agree, a very special person. His dying wish was to be at that Halloween dinner seminar. And although the doctors never thought that he would ever be able to withstand the flights and all involved, he did. And he flew here, was here for both a lecture, the dinner seminar, and one class that you were at and held, and he was able to take over on that. Tony, less than 2 weeks later, that young 26-year-old boy is gone, and that is very, very hard to believe that that happened.
Well,
but
Lorraine,
I think
I
the
don't believe he's
important,
gone.
well, no, he's only his physical
Physically
body.
gone. Physically only.
He's physically
Death,
gone.
remember, death is not an end.
No,
it's a beginning.
beginning. And I do believe that, especially where he is concerned, he claims that the last day of his life, that he saw the Mother of God at the foot of his bed and asked for a second chance. And although maybe the family don't understand that he didn't get it, in a way, he certainly did, because of where he is today, which all of us hope to achieve.
Oh, we're all going to miss him.
We all are
very
going to
greatly.
miss him
Well,
very
tonight
much.
we'll talk about things that will prove that Daniel Berg, it was not the end of him, but a beginning.
Yes.
The next miraculous miracle I would like to talk on would be a woman called Bernadette Soubirous. Now, Bernadette Soubirous was the young girl who's seen the visions of Our Lady at Lourdes.
Mm-hmm.
And at 31 years old, she died of tuberculosis in Navarre, France.
Mm-hmm.
Terrible death in those days, I guess terrible death today. But they didn't have the drugs then that we have today. And of course in those days they didn't embalm the bodies either. Well, they buried Bernadette Soubirous. And I guess it must have been 30 years later. She was canonized a saint. And they exhumed the body expecting to find nothing but bones. Bernadette Soubirous was an incorruptible. I would like to see the picture of her now, and I'll explain.
Now, can you
Now, this
believe
beautiful
that?
lady, this is how she looked at death.
Okay, now this was taken how long after she died, this picture?
Oh, this is
About
taken only
30-some years, Tony.
No, this is
No.
taken only recently,
So like 100 years after she died?
140 years after she died.
And her body has never been in bond?
Never deteriorated. She's an incorruptible. In other words, that beautiful lady that you see there has been dead for over 140 years. Now, is that natural?
Wow.
No,
Absolutely
if
not.
it's not
Isn't it-
natural,
isn't
it's
that
supernatural.
beautiful?
She's in a glass coffin in Navarre, France, at a convent. Anybody can go there and see her. Now, that's your proof of God, of the supernatural. There are many incorruptibles, but she's probably the most famous.
Yes, because of the fact that she actually seen the Mother of God.
Right.
Yeah, at Lourdes.
At Lourdes, and of course the Blessed Mother had foretold that she would die at that age. Well, now here's a friend of Lorraine's coming up next. What do you know about Padre Pio?
Oh, Padre Pio has been very instrumental in my life
That's
in
a
many
picture of him
ways.
right there, right? That's Padre Pio?
Stigmatized,
Now, Padre Pio suffered the wounds of Christ for 50 years of his life.
which you can see in his hands there.
And besides suffering the wounds of Christ for 50 years of his life, he had the gift of discernment, and he physically fought the devil. Now, the first time I ever heard about Padre Pio was when we went into the Amityville home 20 years ago, 1976. When we entered that house, I was sent a second-class relic. Today I have a first-class relic, but at that time I had a second-class relic. And I asked him to enter that home with us because I felt he could help me with discernment, and not only help me with discernment, but I also felt that he physically fought the devil. And so because of that, I thought that was going to be very helpful to me in the Amityville home. But Tony realized that at the time we went into the Amityville home, we didn't even, that was just another haunted house.
Right.
That was certainly not the Amityville horror that we know today. But in the Amityville home, with that relic cupped in my hand, I'm standing in one room where you can actually see the image of him looking down at me. Now, a Catholic priest who was served with him in life and who was at a school in California, man who spoke very, very broken English, we went to meet him. We told him nothing about this photograph, nothing at all about what we had. And then Ed asked him, Father, could we just have a room where we could project something on the wall to show you? And when Ed projected an image of this moose head, where you see his face identical to the slide that was there before, and so we said, or I said to this priest, but why would this man appear to me? And he said, you must have asked him to. And of course, I asked for his presence. Now, on another occasion, Tony, when we were involved in the Smurl case in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, the case on which the book, The Haunted, is based, that was another time that he made his presence known. Now, he's made his presence known on these two cases because there was so much negativity connected to them, and I think he just wanted to more or less reassure us that we were right about what was really there. And we were in the chancellery in Scranton, Pennsylvania to meet with the clergy regarding what help they could be to this family. But they practically closed doors in that family's face. And yet this family were very devout people.
Our face too.
And, right. And, but at that one point in this gorgeous room, Ed and I were all alone when all of a sudden the room just filled with the scent of fresh roses. And so twice now, Tony, he has been very, very
I
helpful.
Think, we've talked about Padre Pio like everybody knows who he is out there. They don't.
Well, they know that he's a priest who suffered the wounds of Christ.
Well,
He was a
what
monk.
about him? What
Yes.
Suffered the
exactly
wounds
who
of
was he,
Christ.
Ed?
He was a Capuchin monk and lived high on a mountaintop in Giovanni Rotondo, Italy.
Yes, he lived in this small cell for over 50 years, and he suffered the wounds of Christ, the hands, the side, the thorns on the head,
Feet
every
too?
wound, the
Feet too?
feet.
The feet.
Now, a lot of people said, well, he inflicted these wounds, or it was psychosomatic. Well, at the moment of death, after 50 years of this, every day, 10 minutes after he died, every wound disappeared.
He was all healed,
Now,
Tony.
did he do that when he was dead? No, he did not. This means that a miraculous miracle occurred all during his life. It was not caused psychosomatically. When a man is dead, he's dead. He can't cause anything through the mind. And all these wounds just healed right up like there was never a wound in his hands, his feet,
Wow.
his side, or his head.
How much blood would come out of his hand?
Oh, tremendous.
They had a lot of blood come out of his hands. It had to be maybe a half a pint each day, which is a lot of blood, to lose through your hands.
I read somewhere that he was embarrassed and he used to cover up his hands.
He did with
if you look
white
at that
gloves.
picture, you'll see the bandages. If we could
Yeah.
see that picture again.
Yes.
You'll see the hand is covered with bandages. See the bandages?
See the bandages,
Yeah, look
Tony?
how that
And he'd only
bloody.
take that off when he would say the Mass. And then he'd cover it up
Now,
again.
he's not a saint yet, though, is he?
He's the beatification for his canonization is underway right now.
Do you know that this man, Tony, could be seen thousands of miles away? During the war, there was an Italian general who felt so bad about losing that he was going to commit suicide in a plane, 30,000 feet up in the air, when suddenly Padre Pio appeared to him and told him that he should not do that. This man, of course, seeing the apparition of Padre Pio, which is actually a doppelganger because he was still alive, heeded his advice, and he told about that miracle, how he was going to blow his brains out in that plane when Padre Pio stopped him. There have been people all over the world, people who have been called hopeless cases, especially where cancer or disease. This man appears to them, solid as we are, and miraculously they are cured.
Wow.
So there's another instance of proof of the supernatural and of God.
Yeah, beautiful.
And then, of course, we have Erling, Iowa.
Oh, yes.
Iowa?
Now, this is, yes,
Erling,
a
Iowa.
case of Anna Eklund, a small village there, which is still the same as it was in 1928. Anna Eklund
Is that
was,
the picture right there?
Yes,
That's Erling,
that's the town
Tony.
of Erling. You
And
see the
that's
church steeple?
Yes.
In that church, the most fantastic things occurred. Terrifying things, in fact. It's a small farm town, and in 1928, a lady was brought down from Michigan to Erling, Iowa, by the name of Anna Eklund. She had been possessed by at least 30 devils and her own father's spirit. The father was probably as evil a man as you could ever come across. Well, the deal was that Father Theophilus Ressinger, who was the most noted exorcist of his time, he had performed, I guess, 25 or 30 really violent exorcisms, wanted to perform the exorcism in the church, St. Joseph's Church in Erling, Iowa. Father Steiger, who was the pastor of the church, was a very dear friend of his. So Father Theophilus Ressinger comes into Erling, and he makes a secret visit to Father Steiger, and he says to him, would you mind if I brought a possessed woman here so that we could exorcise her? Well, if the nuns will allow it. He didn't think the Mother Superior would, but she did. This woman comes in that train. They bring her to the convent. She's on a cot when suddenly she rises up into the air, up to the ceiling.
Wow.
The nuns had to pull her down,
Jeez.
strap her to the cot. Then the foul smells were so bad in that room that nuns had to change every 10 minutes to hold this woman down. there was a substance, and I hope nobody gets sick here, substance like hair and spaghetti would fill the room. Now, this is not Hollywood hype. This is what would come out of this woman's body. She would blow up to the extent that they thought she would explode.
That much?
Yes. And the people, the farmers around there, heard the screechings and screams, and they thought pigs were being killed. These were violent, evil spirits, devils. Finally, the exorcism was a success. And, of course, Anna Eklund went back to her own life. But this is one of the most talked about and most credible cases in the Catholic Church. And there's a book on it which is called Begone Satan, if anybody would like to read about it.
Yeah. Now, Tony, the reason we're as familiar as we are, not only with the case, but the location where it took place, that town is surrounded by cornfields. That's all. That's the only. That big steeple is the only thing that sticks up. We had gone there during the period of time that we were involved with the David Glatzel case in Brookfield to pray for help on David's case in 1980. So that's when the photographs were taken.
Wow. We only have about a minute or two left. So in summation, guys, how would you like to make a summation on these miracles?
Well, again, this is my proof of the supernatural. You ask me for evidence, you ask me for credible proof that God exists, that the supernatural exists. I've just shown you some of it.
Right.
This is only part of the many, many miracles that occur every day in all parts of the world. Now, I'm not saying that it's just Catholicism, don't get me wrong. In fact, I have to tell you that most of the miracles that occur at Lourdes, the shrine,
Are
not Catholics. And not even people that wanted to go there. They were brought there. And so, you know, every religion, every credible religion, prays to a God. We all pray to the same God. I am not stupid enough to think that Catholicism is the one and only true religion. I respect Catholicism. I was brought up in it, and I will practice it. But I respect all other religions.
I think that I would like to end it, Tony, with saying that Daniel Berg, like all of us, definitely survived the grave.
And I will not say goodbye to Daniel. I'll say good night to Daniel.
Yes.
And so long.
Yes.
We'll see you again.
Yeah, we will see you again. I know we will, Daniel.
Okay.
I know we'll see you again.
For those who'd like to write in, our address is P.O. Box 41, Monroe, Connecticut, 06468. So for Lorraine Warren, for Ed Warren, for you, Daniel, I'm Tony Spera. Good night.